Okay, so in the previous video we framed up our wing, and we've let it dry overnight. It doesn't have to dry that long, but I had other things to do. So I also noticed that the previous two videos the camera was a little out of focus, so we made an adjustment. Hopefully that will help things. At this point we can pull all of our pins off, and you want to hold down the balsa just a bit as you pull, just in case something's stuck. Now these pins out in the middle aren't going to have any glue stuck to them, but just so you don't yank up on the balsa. I'm pulling all the ones with blocks off first because I keep them separate. Okay, that's all the ones with blocks. Now I'll pull the straight pins. I'm going to leave the pins in the basswood for now. Just pulling the pins that are holding the framed up wing down. Oops, there's another block one. Alright, now I'm going to carefully pull the pins on one of the basswood pieces, holding down on the basswood as I pull the pins. Remember, the basswood could be stuck to the wing frame up, so you don't want it moving while you're pulling pins. This one came off easily, so we're good there. Go ahead and pull this one free now. Now this one has the trailing edge of the tips, so you could have a little bit of glue at the corners, so you want to be careful with that. Alright, now we're going to get our blade and just make sure we're free at these corners, and I'll just start it in between the trailing edge and the basswood and cut to the joint. We had a little tiny dot of glue there at the joint. We've got one more pin that we lost a head on here. Get rid of that one. And we're definitely stuck on this end. So again, we'll come in between the balsa and the basswood, just cut up to the joint and see if we can get it freed up here. Actually, we can go right past the joint because that little piece of balsa is excess. Alright, so we can go ahead and trim the excess tip. And we've got this piece sticking up that we wedged in on our one rib that was a little too short. And it'll be easier to get that one once we get it off the board. Alright, both our pieces of basswood are free. Now we want to free it from the wax paper. Just take your blade and slide it under past all the joints. You'll see that most of them are free. Some of them might be stuck a little, especially these corners on the tip. If it doesn't go from one way, try coming in the other. But start at the free edge and work past the joint. So it's free in this area, and then I cut out to the joint there. It just moves, so everything's free now. So we've got the entire wing framed up. So keeping our records, we want to definitely record our mass at this point. The reason that's important is because we want to know if we added too much mass while we were covering it, or if the extra mass is perhaps extra glue or heavy wood in the framing process. So you always want to weigh your parts after they've been framed up and before you cover. That's a good stage to understand where you might have excess mass. I was trying to cut off that extra piece of wood there, and I broke the joint with the rib. And it looks like what happened is I actually got the rib glued to the spacer above the spar. So that's going to take a little bit of fixing. I'm going to actually brush it with a little bit of acetone, because we've got a piece of the wood shim broken off down in the against the spar. We've got the rest of this was hanging on to the rib, so we don't want to double layer in there. Get that down and flush. And I'm just going to use a little bit of the 10% glue because I've already got plenty of glue in the joint. I just need to wet what's there. And the 10% will flow down into the joint and wet everything. Should remake that pretty easily. Alright, well that's dry for just a second. I'm going to get parts from my scale. Now, weighing a framed up piece here is not going to be easy just laying it on the scale. You're not going to get anything accurate. So just pull this up, set it aside. So we're going to open up the scale, and then I've made a little 3D printed disc that goes on the scale and a wire. I stiffened the top because it was bending too much, but it's got a point that goes into the center of this disc and a hook that goes. You don't have to get this fancy, just something to hang a wire off the side of the scale. And then this goes on the scale and the wire hangs off the edge of the table. We'll tear that. And then we're going to hang the completed frame. Re-tear this. This scale sometimes drifts on me. I've got to get it looked at. $249. 245. We'll call it 245. 245 milligrams. So that is the cumulative weight after all the parts, but before covering. So 245. Looks like my last one was 278. So I did a lot better on this one. Which is great. I'm just going to double check that weight, re-tear the scale. This scale seems to need some warm up before it's accurate. $250. And I'll just Alrighty. Turn the scale off, close it up, put it out of the way. So we've got the wing framed up, and we're ready to start covering. I'm going to take a quick break for some lunch here. But yeah, I'm real happy with that. The main thing I did different on this compared to my last one is my last one I tended to use a bit too much glue at all the joints on the ribs, and when I pulled them off the wax paper there was actually a little puddle of dry glue at each joint. So you definitely want to make sure you're not over applying glue on the ribs as you build them up. There's a lot of glue joints and that can add up to a lot of weight. So we'll pause there and be back after. Alright, we're ready to start covering. I've got a frame here that is sized a bit bigger than the wing. So it's from outside dimensions about 11 inches across. It's a little narrower than the film. You might want to go just a little narrower, maybe 10.5. Might make it easier to work with. Let's see, length is 24, about 26 inches. And it's just made, this looks like 1/4 inch scrap balsa wood, just glued with CA. This is the top. It's slightly rounded. I just sanded it slightly so you don't have any sharp corners that would catch your covering and tear things. So that's ready. Now this top side we use Vaseline to stick the covering to it, but I got to cut the covering first. So I'm going to turn it over so I can unroll the covering and get the right length. I've got 50 feet of OS film, and I keep track on here how many times I've used it. So we're going to add one more wing to it, and that way I can have an estimate of how long the roll lasts and how much might be left on that roll. This is original OS film. The stuff nowadays is OS 7, which is 0.7 microns thick. This is 0.5 microns thick. Can't get it anymore. Slightly lighter, but for most purposes you're not going to tell. So I'm overhanging this edge by an inch, inch and a half, and I'll run it off this edge, make sure there's nothing sharp where I'm going to set it down. And then I like to cut it off with a soldering iron. You get a nice clean cut, and if you cut it with a knife you can end up with some slight tears, micro tears, and those can end up progressing onto the roll. So the soldering iron gives you a nice clean cut there and a sealed edge to it. Just make sure you don't touch the soldering iron to the roll of covering. Ask me how I know. It will ruin your entire $75 piece of covering there. It was about $75, I think, for the 50-foot roll. Alright, so we've got the covering cut to length, and if you try and put it on like this, you're going to end up with very large wrinkles because it just won't lay flat. So what we do is we grab it by the middle and then we ball it up. And I'm just starting to roll it in my fingers and not catch any air pockets. So all the air is being forced out of the bottom here as I just roll it up. Just make sure if your fingers start to catch on it that you don't trap air in there and you don't tear it with your fingers. So I'm just rolling kind of in a circular motion with my fingers, and I make a nice little ball out of it, marble size or maybe a little larger than a pea size. And now I'm gonna very carefully open it back up. No significant pulling, just let it come apart. And what this does is it puts micro wrinkles throughout the piece of covering, and that makes it like a two-dimensional spring. And so it allows it to conform to your wing shape and up and over the ribs, and gives a little bit of spring tension on it so you don't have to stretch it as tight as a drum to get the wrinkles out. Now, if you do any pulling, you never want to pull apart at the edge. You're always pulling out in the middle. It looks like I've got a little curly Q caught in the middle. I don't want to force it. There we go. Just got a little tight to begin with. And on these edges, if you still see white, just grab in the middle with one hand and comb outward from the middle with the other hand. You never want to pull on an edge. So here we're getting to this edge. I'm going to pull outward toward that edge rather than trying to split the thing in half. Alright, so I don't have it completely unraveled, but it's mostly unraveled. So I will pick it up in the middle again and we'll ball it up a second time. This just gets any areas that might not have gotten micro wrinkles in it. It's going to give it a second chance. So we ball it up twice, again down to somewhere between a pea and a marble. Carefully unball it again. This stuff, if you're not careful, it will rip. Generally, it's pretty good out in the middle, but on the edges, if you have any rough edges, or if you cut it with a knife and had a skip in your cut or something, it will tear so easily. So again, just pulling apart mainly in the middle. And as I get to the edges, I'm grabbing with my left hand out in the middle and combing with just a couple fingers and my thumb. I can do the same with my left hand, going the other way. I'm more coordinated with my right, so I can flip it over. Anytime you see white along the edge, that means you've got several layers twisted together and you want to comb that a little bit. I don't have one here because my wife stopped using them, but if you get a lot of static going, you can use a dryer sheet and just rub your hands on the dryer sheet and that'll get rid of some of your static. Again, I'm grabbing in the middle with my left hand and combing out toward the side and toward the end with my right hand. Alright, so now I think I've got it pretty much unraveled. I don't see any significant white zones. There's a little there. Again, just comb it out to the edge. Leave it balled up in the middle. I will flip this back to the smooth side. Get a little bit of Vaseline. And we're just going to spread a thin coat. We don't want it getting the covering all greasy, so now there's other people will do a frame that's got two long edges and then a mechanism of some sort joining them with no ends on the frame, and what that does is allows you to adjust the tension side to side on the entire piece of covering more easily. But you need a little bit of more margin at the ends because you're not supporting the ends. So unless you want the ends to get saggy on you, which become the tips of your plane, you're going to have to be a little bit longer than the, what did I say, 26 inches here, maybe 28 to 30 inches, and it'll waste a little bit more covering. And you really don't want to get too much Vaseline on here because you don't want it smearing all over your covering. Anywhere you've got Vaseline on the covering, it's going to be hard to get it to stick. So just rub in a little bit of Vaseline all the way around. We're not trying to stick it on like glue, we're just trying to tack it in place. I'm just going to give it a quick wipe with the tissue, just a light wipe. I'm not pressing down hard, just to get any excess wads of Vaseline off. Okay, now I'm right-handed, so I want to finish with my right hand, so I'll go to the left end from my point of view, and I'm going to find the two corners, and I'm going to just lay it on there. You don't have to stretch it tight as a drum, just drag your finger lightly on the Vaseline covered stick, and then come down to the other end, and you're going to stretch it just a bit lengthwise and lay it on the frame. Get the whole edge so it's on the frame. You don't have to get it completely tacked down yet, but get it so it's holding it in place. And we can get the other corner, and you can see the whole thing looks a little bit springy. That's great. Pull this edge just a little bit so it's all on there. And now I've got wrinkles going the long way here, so you get the wrinkles out by pulling crossways, not to the sides. You want to pull the slack out in the direction the waves are heading. So it's like if those waves were heading in the shore, you're pulling from the shore to tighten them up. And you just kind of comb your fingers a little bit. Don't want it tight as a drum. You just want it tight enough to get the large scale wrinkles out of it. This is important. If you get it too tight, then your wing's going to end up with a warp in it, and it's going to give you struggles. You can take out a little bit of warp with the wing posts, but you don't want a lot of it. You don't want the motor stick twist fighting the warp. It's even more important on the stab to not get it too tight. I'd rather have a slightly baggy stab than a slightly tight stab, because a tight stab will warp and your tail boom doesn't have enough torsional stiffness to take it out. Alright, so I've got it stretched just enough to get the large wrinkles out. Now, if I were to take the framed up wing and lay it on here, it sits up on the high point of the ribs and it's not touching the covering. That's no good because that's too tight and you'll end up with a warped surface. So what you got to do now is slide the covering a little on the frame. And I like to start by just pulling outward on the middle of the frame just a little bit, and that gives a little slack in it. But I have found if you start pushing down with your fingers, you're going to end up with finger marks all over it, indentations into the covering. It's going to look ugly. So I've got this piece of foam core. This is 3/16 inch, cut to the exact outline of the wing, and then I've bent it. You can see some creases in here from bending it. On the convex side, there's no creases because I bent toward the other side, and that put some creases in the concave side. So I'm going to put the convex side down on top of the covering. And what this is allowing me to do is to push down on the covering and get a uniform push instead of pushing down with my fingertips and getting dimples from my finger into the covering. And what you're going to find is it very easily slides off the edges. In fact, I slid off too much, so I'm taking out some of the wrinkles there. But it tends to pull a little harder on the ends. And so you may need to manually help it on the ends to get it unlocked from the ends. And that looks like it's sitting down pretty good. It may be a little loose now, but we can tighten it up once we get the wing on it if necessary. Now we're going to put the wing on and see how she's settling down. And you're going to look for points that are holding it off the surface. It's pretty close like it is. Right in this corner it's holding it a little high, so I'm working my fingers outside of the wing itself so I can pull some covering. These corners are the hardest parts to pull. Got a big wrinkle here, so I'll just comb just a little bit. This rib looks like it's up a little high. That's laying pretty good. Alright, now before you glue it down, you do want to check your boron, and I've got one boron typically, if you use the boron pen, it's going to be near the starting end of putting it down that it comes up. I might have a little there. So before I start trying to glue this down, I'm just going to check over the boron, make sure everything is down well, and then we'll continue with the covering. So this one I've got a loop coming up on the boron. Let's see, what do I do with my blades? Don't know where I put my blades. This is typical. I'm gonna pause for a second. Alright, I found my blades. So in this case we've got a loop up and then it's glued at the end. So what we're going to want to do is get a little bit of acetone and free up this end. Just run a little acetone on it and then get a blade under it and should come right up, but it's not. So a little more acetone. Don't force it or you'll break the boron. And actually this boron is going out quite a bit past the rib. We don't really need that. We don't want to put so much acetone on that we get the rib joints coming loose. So if this doesn't come up, all right, there it goes. It just came up. And then we'll take our 10% glue. Let me get my eyes on. %, because we don't want to add a lot of glue weight here. We just got to re-tack down this boron at the end here. Not particularly surprising. Most often when I have boron issues with the boron pen, it's at the starting end. Goes on a little bit dry. So easy fix, not a lot of stress in that area. Just look at the rest of your boron. A lot easier to deal with the boron before you cover the wing. Got a little bit here where it deviated off the center a little bit. So I'm just going to put a wee little bit of 10% glue on it. Kind of melts the old glue, adds a little bit of adhesive to it. That looks good. Alright. We'll flip it over and just double check the top. That one looks nice. Excellent. I did a better job on that side. Alright, so get your glue bottles out of the way. Make sure you're getting the convex side of the ribs downward. And once again, check for large wrinkles. I got a few large wrinkles through the middle of the wing. I'll just comb this edge. It's a lot better to spend time now getting the details worked out than to fight it later when you've got too tight of a covering job. Now I've got some real tight stretches to the corner here. The corners are areas that you need the most attention because they don't slide too well on this frame. So I pull it off the frame in the corner a little and then have to pull it out a little away from the corner on each side to get rid of some of these wrinkles. But the main problem is this corner can tend to be a sticky point. This corner same way. And overall that looks pretty good. Got a little bit of a wrinkle right in the middle here. Okay. Now, what I like to do, and this is something new, I haven't done it a lot in the past, so if you've built with me in the past, this is new and it seems to help a lot. Take some 1/8" square maple dowels and just lay them on the ribs parallel to the leading and trailing edges, and that just gets the wing under a little more control. Applies a little downward pressure so you can see where those final tight spots are and work them out. Overall that looks good. We'll go ahead and add a second one on each side. That hopefully isn't too much weight. Got a little bit of a wrinkle here outside the wing, but it's going to translate into tension in the wing. So just take your time. You know, again, you don't want it tight as a drum, but you don't want big wrinkles, and you want it stretched a little, because if you just let the micro wrinkles win out here and not be stretched a little bit, they'll stretch out in flight, and then you'll end up with Mr. Baggy Pants. So that looks pretty good all around, and with just a little bit of weight on here, I'm actually going to take one of those off on each side. I think that's too much weight. Yeah, with just one stick on it, I see it's touching down everywhere, so that's perfect. Now, I have a vial with some 3M77 thinned with a solvent, and in the old days we used trichloroethylene, but that's not available anywhere anymore. So what I use is called Electroclean from CRC, heavy duty electric parts degreaser. This is available from Lowe's. The Lowe's site now says it's not available online, but I did find a couple cans in the store in the electrical department. So this works very well. It does thin a little different from the trichloroethylene that we used to use. So I find with the trichloroethylene we thinned it about 180 to 1, and that worked really well. I find that's a little bit weak now, and so I thin it to about 100 to 1 or 90 to 1, and that seems to work very well. Now some people go ahead and paint this on the frame first, and then use straight solvent to melt it on, but I haven't found that necessary. I'll come along and just touch the brush laying down into the corner between the covering and the frame. And what you see me doing here is getting each corner of the rectangle in the middle tacked down. And I'm coming from the outside of the wing in most cases, and the reason for that is to any excess you get on the covering like I did there, that's going to get cut off later rather than being extra weight to carry around. So we'll let that set up a second, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to show you this. It's a 3D printed, I call it a top hat. Bottle fits right in, and it makes it spill proof or spill resistant. This is nasty solvent, so if you can, open a window. If you can open a window without it blowing across your surface. All right, so we've nailed down those corners, and now before we proceed, I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to go corner to corner. And that's at 16 5/8. Oh, just drop that off the table. That looks pretty good, 16 5/8. So what we're doing is making sure we got this on there square. If it's not square, come back and check that again. That rib's got a bit of a warp to it. All right, so now we're ready to go. And what I'll normally do, I'm going to put my eyes on again, is I will work on the spars first. And they're the easiest because they've got the boron on there, and that kind of seals the surface and makes this stuff stick better. And I try not to push down on the covering much. What I want to do is just touch the brush in the corner between the covering and the balsa and let it wick into the joint. And it's mostly solvent, so most of it's going to evaporate. You want to make sure you're using plenty. You can add a lot of weight with this, and we did a lot of experiments back when we were using trichlor to see what the weight gain was with the different mixtures and what was the minimum mix that we could get away with and get the covering to stick. And that's how we came up with the 180 to 1. But that was with trichlor, and with this thinner it seems happier for the minimum required to stick. It seems happier with about 100 to 1, and that's by mass. So you basically tear your scale with this bottle on it, and then spray just real short, like 10 milligrams of 3M77, then re-tear it, and if you got 10 milligrams, now you need 1,000 milligrams, or about a gram of thinner added in. So you just spray in there, or you can spray into another bottle and use a pipette to add the thinner to the 3M77 while it's on the scale and you're watching the scale. That's probably the more accurate way than to actually spray the thinner in. Now, what you're going to find is these tips can be pretty frustrating because they're virgin wood. They've not seen any kind of glue on them so far. They need a bit more work to get them to stick. Don't be tempted to go in with like a 40 to 1 or 50 to 1 mixture and try and stick it down. You're going to add a lot of weight. Just be patient with it. Get a little bit of glue flooded in there. Now again, a lot of people prefer to take the mixture and paint it onto the frame. And then lay the frame down after that's dried, and then just use straight solvent to melt the glue mixture and get it stuck to the covering. That's going to guarantee you the least weight gain. And some people will actually take and use a denser mixture, say a 40 to 1, and put dots along the frame instead of completely brushing the whole frame with that mixture. And then when they brush on the solvent, it's very much like I'm doing with the mixture here, and that solvent will loosen and spread out the 3M77. We used to do it that way. I've found that this is just as effective and one less step. Okay, so now I've done the whole outline. Now I'm going to come in and do the ribs. This outer compression rib is your critical one. You do not want that joint coming loose. Because that will affect your ability to put the dihedral into this thing. Perfect. Again, I'm laying the brush into the 90-degree angle between the covering and the balsa wood. And that allows it to wick in. Looks like I've got a broken joint on one of my ribs there. Got it back into position. I'll use a little tiny drop of glue just to remelt what was there. These micro cementers from Indoor Free Flight Supply are an absolute game changer. Looks like there's plenty of glue on there. I grabbed the 50% by mistake. I'm going to use the 10% glue. Control the tip until the drop size is what I'm looking for. And then I'll come in here and just add a drop to the joint. I've got it sealed all the way around so I can take those pieces of wood weight off of there. And you know, on the ribs you don't have anywhere for excess glue to go because you're keeping both sides of the covering. So you want to use a little bit of self-control on how you put this glue on. Nice. Perfect. All right. That actually stuck very well everywhere. I'm just gently touching the covering and looking for, there's a spot there where it's not adhered to the tip. A lot easier to fix it now than after you've cut the covering. That edge can be really hard to chase down. So you want to make sure you've got a good bond to begin with. So just go around and inspect and make sure it's bonded everywhere, especially the outer periphery. Like I said, the spars tend to grab it better than the tips. So the tips are where you particularly need to pay attention to see if anything has come loose. You don't want to be chasing loose tip covering right after you cut it out of the frame here. Like I said, this virgin wood here tends to soak up a little more of the glue and not give you a good bond to the plastic, so you want to pay particular attention on these tips. Okay, we'll keep that glue handy in case we need it. Now we're going to go ahead and cut this out. Got two tools that work great for that. One is a cardery. This was sold as Max Wax on Amazon. It's a thread cutter. So as long as you're pushing in the button here, you get the tip hot. You can check it on a corner here, make sure it's good and hot. This is nice because there is no cord to get in the way and drag across your project and rip your covering. So I kind of like the cardery, but you do have to hold the button pressed in, and then if you look, the tip gets narrow at the tip, and you want to stay on that narrow part. That's the part that gets hot. If you get up onto these legs, they're colder, and you'll tear the covering if it sticks onto there. So you have to have a lot of control of your hand, and some of the kids I've worked with, especially the younger kids, have really struggled with the cardery. So the other option is a soldering iron, and you want a variable temperature one. I'm going to set it for about 600. And that's not going to be close enough. We're going to have exactly the problem I mentioned, dragging the cord across everything. And the nice thing about the soldering iron is there's no need to worry about holding in a button. Now, what I like to do is cut it about 1 millimeter. And notice I'm bracing my hand against the edge of the desk here. And I'm cutting it so there's about 1 millimeter left on the outside of my framed up wing. And if you get your hand against your desk here and guide yourself, you can get a nice clean cut about 1 millimeter out. And that millimeter will wrap it onto the wood, and so you get a second surface to attach. It's especially important to me on the tips. That's where it comes loose. On the spar, you could cut it right against the wood and you'll be fine. Now, I'm going to leave a little bridge here right at the end of the spar, and I'm going to start cutting again and cut out along the trailing edge of the tip. Again, leaving about an extra millimeter. And that bridge is just to support the frame while I'm cutting the rest of it. You don't want it flopping around in the breeze. Okay, there I left about 2 millimeters, which is going to be a bit much. Whoops, I cut my bridge there by mistake, so I'll leave a bridge at the corner here. So I got the straight trailing edge, and I'm going to flip this around so I can work close to myself and see what I'm doing. Perfect. Once again, I'm going to cut along the spar first, bracing my hand on the table and leaving up to about 1 millimeter of excess covering there. If you don't have a variable heat soldering iron, you're going to have a lot of, most hardware store soldering irons are going to be too hot, and you're going to be melting away, and you want to be careful not to melt back into the keeper part of your wing. Alright, we have no bridge there, so I'm going to leave a bridge at the corner here. Again, bracing my hand against the table. And this approach works good too, to take little strokes instead of trying to do it in one smooth pass. And depending on the angle I've got, sometimes that works better for me. My kids, particularly the young ones, prefer the soldering iron, so I'm trying that. I usually do the cardery, but the temperature control is nice on this. Okay, I'm going to leave a bridge there, and we've got the final part of the outline here at the tips. Move some bottles out of the way. I've got a brush sticking up. Sometimes it pays to just sit back and clean up your workbench, but not today. Always in too much of a hurry for that. Okay, we got a bridge in there, so I can cut the covering, continuing the previous slot. Again, leaving about 1 millimeter. And that's my preference, to leave this millimeter flap that you can turn up. I think it makes a much stronger bond without a lot of additional weight. Alright, I've gone all the way around, so now I'm going to cut this bridge here. Cut this guy. That guy is, here's the bridge here. And we've got one at the tip over here. And our wing is free. Now, because we left that, I'm going to pick it up by the spar. You don't want to pick it up by a rib or anything. But because we left that extra rim around there, we're going to have to glue that on. I'm going to bring my building board back because I know it doesn't have any sharp edges. And for this, I'm going to use my extra thin covering glue, so the 180 to 1, because I feel I've gotten plenty of glue on there already. My brush right here. Again, work where it's comfortable to work. I like it on the side that I'm on. And you can't just brush up. You got to put a little on the covering and then immediately brush it up against the balsa. If you try and brush just up, you're going to not get glue in the joint. So it's kind of two motions, a little bit of glue and come back the other way, brushing the free edge of the plastic upward. The risk here is you get some of this solvent-laden glue down into the joint and actually melt what mounted it to the frame. So you want to quickly get, and I'm brushing kind of with an upward motion with the side of the brush. So the tip of the brush in the groove there, and then the side of the brush to smash that, smash is not the right term, but to push that, coax that covering up against the balsa, and that seals it. Alright, we got that spar. So now I'm going to get the other spar turned around to where I can get to it. Alright, and then same thing here. Liquid in the groove, backstroke it with the side of the brush. Please make sure you have adequate ventilation. Obviously you can't have a fan blowing across here. But if you start feeling lightheaded at all, shut down the operation, get outside, get some fresh air. Alright, so I've done both the spars. Now I'm going to work on the tips. Start with the trailing edge. And the capillary force from the extra liquid will tend to bring that covering up and in contact with the balsa. So you don't have to coax it very hard with the brush. It wants to go and grab onto its friend, the balsa wood. If you get to a point where a little covering has come off the frame, it's a pain in the butt. But don't chase away from it. Let it set up there and then get a little bit of wet on, if the covering is folded in on itself, get it a little bit of wet where it's folded and kind of comb it out with your finger while you stretch it on. And that extra millimeter really helps out with that. So that's one of the reasons. It makes a stronger joint to begin with, but then it really helps you in the end if you have to do any patching. So now I'm going to go around the tip here, same kind of thing. A little bit of brush of liquid into the joint and then side of the brush to coax it against the frame. And doing it right away so that not if, but when the solvent in this glue gets down to the original joint, it is already joining up to the side, at least by capillary forces, and won't unravel on you. Now on this one I cut a little bit longer than a millimeter, I'm guessing. So there's a little excess, and I just continue to wrap it around onto the expose what's on the top now, but it's actually the bottom of the wing, and makes an even stronger joint. Yeah, I've got 1.5 to 2 millimeters of exposed covering here, so it's on a lot of this it's actually wrapping up onto the bottom, and that's fine. And like I mentioned, if it comes off anywhere, your best bet is to leave it alone for 15 minutes in that area. Let what glue is grabbing there grab on before you start trying to fight it. Otherwise, if the separation just continues to progress, you're going to get worse and worse and eventually decide you just got to recover the thing. Alright, a little bit of it wrapped over onto what's up on top here. Oh no, I do have a spot here where the trailing edge came loose, so we're gonna turn this around, get the other tip, let that dry for a minute, and then we'll try and fix that. Hope for the best. Come in here on the corner here where we've got the spar extended. I'm just going to melt right up to the tip wood so it doesn't bridge that corner. This one is also coming off right at the corner. That happens. Alright, let's see. This one, the entire trailing edge of the tip came loose. That's never good. Oh, I see. It stuck to the wax paper. Alright, well I'm going to use that to my advantage. It's still stuck to the wax paper. I'm going to come back in here and try and reattach the covering while using the wax paper to stretch it into place. We'll see if that got it. We'll get it off the wax paper. I'll have to do a little bit more touching up, but I'm going to let that sit for a minute. We do have an edge there. Crummy. Well, you know what, I've had this happen before. You really don't want to set it down on wax paper. Whether by static electricity or getting a little glue in there, it'll stick down. Alright, this we just got it come off at the very corner, so we're going to try putting a little bit of glue on the wood and then see if we can comb that corner out. Got plenty of covering there. That extra millimeter is coming into handy. I think I didn't quite cut the balsa off square. There's an extra 1/4 millimeter or so of the tip going beyond the trailing edge piece, and that made it a tough corner to cover. I managed to catch it, get it glued back on, so we're good on that end. Just looking for any frayed edges staying up. That all looks good. Now we're going to turn it back around and work on that trailing edge issue there just a bit. I'm moving my support sticks here so I can push the whole frame off the edge of the table, and that gives me finger access under it here. And I'm just holding it still with my thumb and pushing up with my index finger as I comb toward the outside of the frame. And that is definitely getting it. Once it's made contact in the right areas, you really don't want to overwork it. You can slide it to take a few wrinkles out, but the capillary force will keep it in place while the glue sets up. And the more you play with it, the more you're going to get frustrated.